I'm about to tell you one of the most haunting and misunderstood stories to come out of World War II. A story that's been retold for decades, sometimes as fact, sometimes as legend. It's a tale that mixes the brutality of war with the raw power of nature, and it happened on a small, swamp-covered island off the coast of Burma in 1945. This is the true story of what became known as the Ramree Island Massacre. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss more unbelievable true stories like this one. It's January 1945. The Second World War is nearing its end. Germany's collapsing, but in Asia, the fighting rages on. The Japanese Empire still controls much of Southeast Asia, including Ramree Island, a long, low island along Burma's western coast. Ramree wasn't just a dot on the map, it was strategic. Whoever held it controlled access to Rangoon, Burma's capital, and to vital supply routes along the Bay of Bengal. The Allies knew this, and so did the Japanese. That month, the British launched an operation to seize the island and open the way to Rangoon. The British 26th Indian Division, supported by air and naval forces, landed on Ramree's beaches on January the 21st, 1945. Waiting for them were roughly 1,000 Japanese soldiers, veterans, disciplined and determined not to surrender. The first clashes were fierce. British artillery thundered across the shoreline while Japanese defenders fought back from concrete bunkers and trenches hidden among the palms. But within days, the British had the upper hand. The Japanese line fractured, outgunned and outnumbered, they began retreating inland into the one place that offered cover, the swamps. Ramree Island is infamous for its mangrove swamps. The air is humid, the ground is alive with leeches and mosquitoes, and the water's home to one of the most fearsome creatures on Earth, the saltwater crocodile. These animals can grow to more than 20 feet long, weigh over a ton, and strike with terrifying speed. They're silent, patient, and lethal. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles in the world, capable of overpowering almost any animal that enters their territory. Unlike most predators, they're not afraid of humans. They see us as potential prey. They literally are known to hunt humans. These crocodiles are opportunistic hunters and ambush predators, lying motionless for hours, sometimes days, near the edges of rivers, estuaries, and mangrove swamps. When an animal or person approaches the water's edge, they strike in an explosion of power and precision. They have one of the strongest bite forces ever measured, estimated at over 3,700 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bones, snap through limbs, and drag full-grown animals underwater in seconds. Once they seize their prey, they perform what's known as a death roll, spinning violently to tear flesh apart or drown their victim. Saltwater crocodiles are also known to actively hunt humans. Every year, dozens of fatal attacks are reported across regions like Northern Australia, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia. They often lurk near water sources where people bathe, fish, or collect water, launching sudden attacks from below the surface. In many rural coastal areas, locals still treat certain stretches of river as forbidden zones. They're cunning, territorial, and capable of learning human patterns. If a person regularly visits the same riverbank, a crocodile can remember an ambush at the same spot days or even weeks later. These creatures have survived since the age of dinosaurs, perfect evolutionary survivors built for stealth and power. And in 1945, there were plenty of them in the swamps of Ramree Island. For the retreating Japanese, the mangrove swamps were not just a crocodile's home, they were the only escape route left. As British troops closed in, about 900 Japanese soldiers withdrew towards the western side of the island. Their orders were to escape through the swamps and regroup further north. It was a desperate move. The terrain was flooded from recent rains, the mud was waist deep, and visibility was almost zero. But surrender was unthinkable. The Imperial Japanese Army taught that capture was a shame worse than death, so one night, under the cover of darkness, they slipped into the mangroves. The British heard them, a faint shuffle of boots and water, and knew they were gone. They didn't follow. No one wanted to enter that swamp. Instead, the British blocked the exits, set up positions along the edge, and waited. For the next several nights, British patrols reported hearing gunfire and shouting echoing through the mangroves. Sometimes there were bursts of rifle fire, other times agonised screams that faded into silence. One British Marine described it later as a nightmare orchestra of war and nature. But the most chilling part wasn't the gunfire, it was what followed. Splashes, heavy, powerful splashes. Something was moving in that black water. Among the British forces was a naturalist named Bruce Stanley Wright, who served as an officer of the area. He later wrote about what he heard, and his account became the foundation of the legend. Wright wrote, "That night was one of the most horrible that any member of the ML crews ever experienced. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp, punctured by screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and the crashing of the animals as they attacked, mingled with the despairing cries of the Japanese, made a cacophony of hell that will never be forgotten." This account by Wright became the cornerstone of the legend and was even featured in the Guinness Book of World Records as the worst crocodile attack in history. It's one of the most chilling passages in all of wartime writing, but even Wright admitted he wasn't inside the swamp. His description was based on what men on the perimeter saw, heard and reported afterwards, meaning much of what followed became part history, part horror story. When the battle finally ended, British reports stated that out of roughly 1,000 Japanese soldiers, about 500 were killed from a mix of gunfire, disease, exhaustion and drowning. Roughly 500 others managed to escape through the swamp and were later captured or killed elsewhere. No one knows how many were taken by crocodiles. Undoubtedly, many soldiers were eaten in that swamp. Even the most conservative estimates can't deny the grim reality that hundreds of men entered the mangroves that night and only a fraction emerged. Ramree Island's mangrove swamps were a living nightmare, a maze of black water. The crocodiles that inhabited those waters were not passive creatures, they were apex predators, perfectly adapted for ambush. To them, the chaos of war, the blood, the movement, the noise, was a dinner bell. Can you imagine what those soldiers went through in the darkness of night? Their boots sinking into mud that clung like quicksand, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, fear and hunger. Every step could mean sinking deeper or stepping into unseen water somewhere with something waiting. They couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy above, and the air was thick, heavy with heat, humidity, and the smell of rot. All around them came sounds that made the blood run cold. Splashes, low growls, sudden screams that were cut short. Somewhere nearby, men were being dragged under. You could hear the thrashing, the screaming, the bubbling, and then the silence. Some soldiers fired wildly into the darkness, their rifles crackling over the chorus of terror. Others froze, too afraid to move, listening to the water ripple as something brushed past their legs. Imagine standing chest deep in black water, unable to tell if the next ripple will be your last. There were no heroes in that swamp, only men trapped between the horrors of war and the jaws of nature. The Ramree Island swamp became not just a battlefield, but a feeding ground. And for many, it was where their screams were swallowed by the night. Over time, the story took on a life of its own. The British soldiers who were there never forgot the screams. And when Wright published his account, journalists and storytellers turned it into a legend. The tale of an entire army devoured in a single night. That version was repeated so many times that by the 1960s, the Guinness Book of World Records called it the greatest disaster suffered from crocodiles in human history. It made headlines, documentaries, and horror books. When the British finally secured the island on the 22nd of February 1945, they found the swamp littered with debris, rifles, helmets, and the remains of the fallen. The stench of decay was overwhelming. Survivors from both sides spoke of mud so thick it could trap a man waist deep, of disease that spread faster than bullets, and of crocodiles lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the movement. One British soldier recalled seeing a crocodile slide silently past their boat, its scales glistening in the muddy light. You could hear them, he said, but you couldn't see them until it was too late. Even after the war, locals would refuse to enter that part of the swamp, calling it cursed. So what really happened on Ramree Island? The truth lies somewhere between fact and myth. Hundreds of men did die, that's certain. In war, it's often impossible to know exactly how everyone died. Chaos consumes everything, and many simply vanish without a trace. Some men fell to gunfire, disease, or exhaustion, but others, without question, were taken by crocodiles. The swamp didn't just hide bodies, it swallowed them whole. Many soldiers disappeared completely, their fates left to the darkness and the jaws of nature itself. And in that sense, the legend captures something real. The horror of being trapped between man-made war and the raw savagery of nature. The soldiers who survived remembered it not as a battle, but as a nightmare. Today, Ramree's mangroves still stand, wild and treacherous. Saltwater crocodiles still rule those waters, and locals know better than to wander too deep, especially at dusk. Every so often, a fisherman's story or a missing traveller reignites the old legend that the swamp remembers. Scientists and historians may argue over the numbers, but no one denies what the soldiers saw or what they heard echoing in the night. The Ramree Island story endures because it captures something timeless, not just the cruelty of war, but the vulnerability of man when faced with nature at its most merciless. In the end, Ramree was not just a battlefield. It was a reminder that, no matter how powerful armies become, there are still places on Earth where the wild holds dominion. The crocodiles didn't know about nations or flags or wars, but in that swamp in 1945, they reminded the world that nature always has the last word. If you found the story of Ramree Island chilling, you need to see what happened just months later when an entire city vanished in a single flash of light. Go and watch our video on our channel, The Man Who Survived 2 Atomic Bombs. It begins on a calm sunny morning in Hiroshima 1945. Children walking to school, shopkeepers opening their doors, seconds before the sky erupted brighter than the sun. The blast didn't just destroy a city, it changed the course of human history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story chilling, subscribe for more real-life survival and historical horror stories from around the world.